turn the music down. Great. And so so this next presentation discussion is about ecstasy. All right. And so we're going to talk about the mesolimbic pathway and ecstasy, the impact it has on ecstasy has on it. Let me just review a few things in the mesolimbic pathway. Okay, so let's say more specific, mesolimbic dopaminergic pathway. Remember, there's a cluster of receptors on the mesolimbic pathway, not only dopamine, but dopamine is the predominant neurotransmitter. And I believe, I'm glad I'm getting this diagram here. Remember, this is the mesocortical pathway here, and this is the mesolimbic pathway. The mesolimbic pathway is the pathway that's basically for the reward, motivation, and learning systems. When this pathway is hyperactive, you get all of those features sort of increasing. And this is the target for substances of abuse. When this network is hyperactive, such as in the case if in the case of withdrawal, or if someone's born with a pathway that appears to be somewhat hypoactive, then you have a lot of decreased interest, decreased motivation, decreased energy, difficulty getting started, things like that, maybe difficulty remembering things. Okay, so this is the pathway that's the target for the drugs of reward. Let me look at the pathways, the receptors on it. Okay. Mesolimbic receptor profile. Right there, great. Just to look at the receptors real quick. Okay, primarily involving dopamine, right? Ooh, that's mesocortical. Okay, VTA okay. Mesolimbic. Okay, here are the dopamine receptors, the 1, 2, 2, 2, 3. Okay, now look at the other receptors. Here, serotonin receptors, opioid, oxytocin. Let me see. Okay, I thought there were also alpha adrenergic receptors on here. All right, too. Okay, well, let me see, NMDA so let me see NMDA receptors. Okay, the mesolimbic pathway in NMDA receptor plays a critical role in regulating dopamine release and are involved in the processes like reward, motivation, and addiction. Okay, yeah, so I was hoping my initial search would show the NMDA receptor, and then I would be able to connect that to ecstasy. So let me put ecstasy here. Here's a look at the mesolimbic receptor profile and influence on NMDA receptors in the context of ecstasy. All right. The mesolimbic pathway and NMDA receptors. The pathway is a crucial part of the brain reward system, heavily modulated by glutamate. All right. So remember, dopamine is a major neurotransmitter on the mesolimbic system, also glutamate there. This is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Okay. NMDA receptors are the major type of glutamate receptor involved in various brain functions. So NMDA are types of glutamate receptors. Synaptic plasticity, neuronal excitability, and firing rates. This makes sense. Okay. The NMDA receptors are complex, typically composed of 2 subunits and 2 regulatory units. Okay, that's to make up these huge G proteins. Okay, let's see the interaction between ecstasy and NMDA. Ecstasy is a psychoactive drug known to influence the mesolimbic system, primarily by increasing the release of monoamines such as dopamine and serotonin. Right. Research suggests that NMDA can also affect NMDA. So ecstasy M, oh, here it is right here. Ecstasy MDMA. I can never get these right. NMDA, right? Okay. Okay, impact of glutaminergic transmission. Okay, so ecstasy can affect activity and expression of NMDA receptor subunits in the brain, like the forebrain cortex, caudate, putamen, and hypothalamus. And so glutamate causes activity and expression of NMDA, which is the glutaminergic receptor. Ecstasy causes the upregulation of glutaminergic receptors, and that creates a person who's very highly excitable. Okay, memory and cognitive functioning. Okay, MDMA, ecstasy, induce alterations in these hypoglutamate receptors alongside affects dopamine, and it may contribute to memory deficits. Involvement in areas of reward effects. Okay, NMDA receptors are thought to play a role in the rewarding effects of MDMA and in the resistance of drug-seeking behavior following abstinence. Yep, you see this? The reinstatement of drug-seeking behaviors following abstinence. That's a dopaminergic story. You know, people go places and be around places with people that they use substances with, and they get an increase in dopamine levels, and somehow through sort of like the conditional reward system, operant learning, they somehow, the places activate the same sort of emotions in them. So if you stop using and went back to the locations where you use, you likely start to get those same feelings again. The potential for neurotoxicity. Okay. While further research is needed, some studies suggest that MDMA's ecstasy's effects on NMDA receptors and glutamate release may be linked to neurotoxicity, particularly in the hippocampus. And that's the whole point of what I was trying to get to today. We had several patients in their early 20s, and the first thing we wanted to say to them is, can you please leave ecstasy alone? Right? Because the ecstasy is MDMA, and it causes the release of a specific type of glutaminergic receptor called NMDA, something like that. And when you activate that excitatory system, it's right till the wheels fall off. The ecstasy causes overexcitation that eventually results in the death of the brain cells. Accumulation of deaths in certain areas, particularly the hippocampus, is what we pick up. And these patients have difficulty functioning in school, functioning at work, staying employed, functioning in relationships because they can't remember things. And when we do the neuropsych testing that tests the parts of their memory, the hippocampus, they can score in a range of someone who's actually diagnosed with a dementia. And this damage can progress. And so I'm not sure if the cognitive impairment secondary to ecstasy or MDMA's use, I don't know if it continues to create damages as even after use. Okay, so those are the receptors. Okay, let's see here. Next, let's look at the let's look at the pathways here. Let me see. Let me show you another viewpoint of the brain, okay? Let me just see. Okay. Give me the brain, give me the brain, give me the brain. Okay. Okay, this is looking, here's the front, okay, anterior, posterior, okay? And this is like the left side of the brain. See the temporal lobe here, parietal lobe, frontal lobe. Sometimes okay. See, okay, I'm looking for the prefrontal cortex. Let me get off this page. Okay, I was trying to find. Okay, maybe this is the. I'll show the prefrontal cortex. Oh, I mean. So let me see if I can get to a few questions. Okay. First question is good setup, Doc. Thank you, Nasir. Appreciate it, buddy. Okay. Great setup, Doc. Thank you. Okay, let me see. So Jan. Okay, Jam. Okay. How is the mesolimbic pathway involved in the love and euphoria people feel in ecstasy? Hyperactivity in the mesocortical pathway creates those positive and rewarding symptoms. I'm going to say symptoms of mesocortical pathway activity. So symptoms of the cocaine, methamphetamines. We reviewed cocaine, we reviewed methamphetamines. Now we're using ecstasy. All of these are targets for the mesocortical pathway, and they produce hyperactivity, or you get we get an improvement in all those symptoms that they wanted to target. Here, okay, hyperactivity in the mesocortical pathway, which is involved in cognitive functioning. So increased alertness, increased awareness, emotional regulations. They feel better, feel more alive, better attention, right? And better motivation, better exact planning, organization, and things like that. And so these are the benefits. Now, when we give patients stimulants, stimulants activate the frontal lobe. I have to, and I'm sure it also affects this mesolimbic pathway. I think there's some have is associated with learning, decreased interest, decreased motivation too. Okay, while often associated with deficiencies, okay, mesocortical dopamine hyperactivity, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, can contribute to impulsivity, impaired decision-making, and difficulties with attention and concentration. Why? If you're blasting on that mesolimbic pathway and you're using all this ecstasy, it's going to turn everything up. And so remember, those dopamine receptors also on the mesocortical pathway. And I think activation of the mesocortical pathway is probably what interferes with these things here, because that mesocortical pathway extends, I think, all the way up to the frontal lobe. So it's a long pathway. And so, so the answer to that question is yes. Next is here's the next question here. Okay. Is the connection people feel on ecstasy real, or is it just a neurochemical trick? You mean, do I really love her, or is it just chemicals? It's chemicals. Is it? Is all it? That's the thing about the ego, is that it interprets all these things, and the activity of the network basically determines reality. Right? Yeah, and so, but it's all based upon chemicals. None of the objects around us have any meaning to them, or they don't have any type of value to them. All the objects on this planet are basically the same. Okay, so it's a neurochemical trick. Everything is a neurochemical trick. And so the objects only have what you assign the meaning to the objects. The objects around you do not have any inherent meaning. And so everything what you're assigned to it. Okay, let me see the next one here. Can ecstasy lead to emotional numbness or disconnection after the high wear off? It actually leads to withdrawals, hypoactivity in the network. Let me try to see if I can give you an example of that. Let's see. Can you show me the let me see if I can ask a question like this. I want a diagram that should show the presynaptic, the presynaptic release of dopamine. And I think they simply use up all the vesicles. Um, okay, here. All right, the process of dopamine release from the presynaptic cell. So when ecstasy hits the receptor, it causes the release of dopamine. The process of dopamine release from the presynaptic cell. Dopamine is synthesized and is packaged, right? Now it's packaged into synaptic vesicles. Remember this vascular monoamine transporter 2. These are very important vesicles because they package the dopamine, and they exist in their presynaptic bud, and they're ready for release. Okay, then you have the action potential comes around. When the action potential arrives at the presynaptic nerve, it depolarizes the membrane. Okay, calcium influx, right? This depolarization causes open voltage-gated calcium channels, causing the influx of calcium into the presynaptic terminal, right? The influx of calcium initiates the release process. Wow. Okay, vesicles docking and fusions. The increase in intracellular calcium triggers events similar to snare proteins. I got to look them up again. The protein helps tether the vesicles to the presynaptic membrane, docking and prepare for fusing. Wow. So it's a tethering system. Okay, exocytosis. When the snare complex assembled, the synaptic vessels fuse with the presynaptic membrane, releasing dopamine into the synaptic cleft. All right, then dopamine goes and it binds crosses and it binds the receptor. Dopamine binding to receptor. Dopamine molecules diffuse across the synaptic cleft and bind to the dopamine receptors or the presynaptic neurons on the postsynaptic neuron and the presynaptic autoreceptors. Binding to postsynaptic receptor generate a signal in the postsynaptic neurons. Okay, and then you have reuptake by the dopamine transporters pump. So yeah, okay, and so that's the mechanism. So my understanding with things like cocaine and cocaine is very potent in the release of these presynaptic stored dopamine, methamphetamines, and also ecstasy. So when you get that flushing of the dopamine out of the presynaptic cell, when that party's over, the whole network becomes hypoactive, and that's when they should begin going into withdrawals. So when they come into the hospital and you see them the following day, it's very hard for them to actually take a history because they are so fatigued and tired. And I think this is this hypodopaminergic state that they're in. Great. And so let me see, let me have one more questions here. Okay, I have Max on the line here. How do people become emotionally dependent on ecstasy even if they were not physically addicted to it? Those these people who have mesolimbic systems that sort of exist more in a hypoactive state typically feels the anhedonia, the apathy, decreased interest, decreased motivation. And so when they take substances of abuse, that increases that network activity, they feel better. And that's the positive reward. The goal is to feel better, and the tool to feel better would be the substance. And so that's one of the reinforcing effects because you want to feel better. And if they're not physically, even if they're not physically addicted to them, eventually this introducing these compounds into this system like that is going to interfere with its functioning. And I think that's what you're going to call some type of physical addiction to some extent. Okay, so I'm at the 26-minute mark. When we treat the medical complications connected to ecstasy use and provide supportive treatment, and you want to make sure you have the option to send the patient to neuropsych testing for patients who use has a history of ecstasy use, I make sure that I get neuropsych testing to test their memory functioning, to test their prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of abstract reasoning, and also to test their frontal lobe so that we can test their degree of, measure their degree of executive functioning. It's very important to get these as a baseline when the patient comes in, because when you want to test them in the future, you can see you have some type of marker to assess their progress or during that period of time. So it's a pleasure for everyone. And again, if you're having any issues with ecstasy and you would like me to manage your case, I do a lot of inpatient work, and you can get an assessment on my online clinic, and we can do your workup on your online clinic, come up with your treatment plan and medication, then have you admitted to the hospital of your choice. So contact my online clinic, and if you need help, we'll be able to help you. Thank you so much. Other than that, I'll see you guys later. Take care, guys. So let me go ahead and get started. This discussion is on the mesolimbic pathway. And specifically, we're going to talk about the effects of PCP and LSD. Let me just take you through some of our earlier discussions here. First, we here in our discussion on these pathways, remember we looked at this mesocortical pathway right here. And this mesocortical pathway, when it's injured, basically before puberty, it results in symptoms that consistent with autism, right? However, after puberty, when this network is damaged, we can see hyperactivity results in symptoms that are consistent with positive symptoms of schizophrenia, and hypoactivity seems to be associated with negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And we went through the receptors located on this nerve bundle. And this nerve bundle is primarily innervated by dopamine neurons. Also, remember, they have glutaminergic neurons on them, glutaminergic receptors on it. Remember, they also have, I believe, serotonin receptors on them and norepinephrine receptors on us also. Excessive glutaminergic activity can really excite this nerve bundle, and you'll see positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Later in our discussion, we moved our attention over to this other very important network, the mesolimbic pathway. Mesolimbic pathway, and this is sort of like the reward and learning pathway. And remember, this is the target for substances that are used in abuse, for substances that are abused. This is the primary target. Hyperactivity is associated with symptoms that people want that's associated with intoxication. And hypoactivity in its network, typically dopamine depletion and withdrawals. We went through cocaine and the impact that it has on this system, causes the release of presynaptic dopamine into the synaptic cleft, and results in increased transmission along these dopaminergic neurons, therefore making them hyperactive. And it comes from the vesicles that are stored presynaptically, and those vesicles dock and they release the dopamine into the synaptic cleft. But once all the presynaptic dopamine is gone, there's nothing else to push out into the synaptic cleft. And so now we have a situation such as withdrawals, and such the network is hypoactive. We also looked at the impact that ecstasy has on this pathway. Again, ecstasy, I keep getting the nomenclature, MNDA, the name of ecstasy, and it activates NMDA, which is a type of G protein, type of glutamate G protein. So ecstasy activates glutamate directly through the MNDA as its receptor, as a target. The problem with ecstasy is that the activation of the glutamate leads to overexcitation, and you risk the cell dying, sort of right until the wheels fall off. And that's one of the characteristics of ecstasy that concerns me, And so I always make sure I do some degree of neuropsych testing on these patients to document their memory function and see how their hippocampus and memory is functioning. You also want to see how their prefrontal cortex is functioning to see if they have access to abstract reasoning. And you also want to look at their frontal lobe to see if they're able to, if they have some degree of executive functioning, meaning they're able to go make a coherent plan as they engage with the world. So ecstasy really damages the brains and all those circuits because it targets glutamate. Overactivity leads to death. And so ecstasy users, as well as methamphetamine users, can experience a lot of deaths associated with this excitation process. And that damage can continue to progress in the future. I'm not sure how much it continues to propagate in the future, but I know in the case of traumatic brain injuries, you may not get any damages, pick up any damages currently, but after the the process continues, you can pick up the deficits maybe at 10, 15 years later. So let's look at PCP, okay? And so let's see, I think I'll just go here. And let's see here. Okay. Meso. Okay. So next on PCP. Okay. Look here. PCP is primarily exerts its effect by acting as a non-competitive. It doesn't have to compete for the site on the NMDA receptor. Yeah, here's the breakdown. The NMDA receptor antagonism. PC binds to a specific site within the ion channel of the NMDA receptor. Now remember, this is a type of glutaminergic receptor. Normally, NMDA receptors are activated by glutamate, leading to an influx of positive ions and depolarization. PCP blocks this ion channel, preventing the flow of positive ions into the cell, inhibiting neuronal depolarization. This doesn't sound good. This disruption of glutamate excitation activity is thought to be responsible for the anesthetic, analgesic, and dissociative effects of PCP. Yeah, every time patients come in with PCP, they have the hallucinatory experiences and things like that. And it says NMDA receptor. And I guess the way it operates opposite, it shuts it down. Additional, beyond NMDA receptor antagonism, PCP also affects other neurotransmitters. Okay. Inhibit dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin reuptake. It also acts on receptors, those opiate receptors, muscarinic receptors, nicotinic, and GABA. The GABA receptors again. Let me go back to the mesolimbic pathway to look at the receptors. So say, give me a list of receptors. So patients who are using PCP, it exerts its effect primarily by targeting the mesolimbic pathway. It's important to know the receptors on the mesolimbic pathway so we can understand what medications or what tools we need to sort of stabilize this pathway. Mesolimbic pathway primarily utilizes dopamine receptors, I guess all of them. Also interact with other receptors. Okay. Mu, kappa, delta, and glutamate receptors, right? Dopamine and glutamate receptors. So we're going to use you in this case when they come in with psychosis and agitation and things like that. Um, we need to use the dopaminergic agents to sort of block the activity in that pathway. And typically, when you hear about patients with PCP, usually it's a bizarre history of lifting a car off the ground or fighting 10 people or things like that, superhuman stuff. So you can see how excessive glutaminergic activity leading to all this excitation is one of the reasons why the entire body's, the person being host, is agitated. And so we definitely want to use the major the typical antipsychotics for that. Okay. Next, let me see. I'm going to look at LSD. So remember,
reload.
PCP is synthetic. Also. So let me look at the next one here is, let me see if I have any questions. Let me know if you have any questions about PCP before I go to LSD. Does anyone have any questions before I go to the next example? Let me see if I have any questions.
Ness, I'll read Matrix.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to LSD. Okay. All right. Okay. Psychedelic. Exerts its effect by activating serotonin, also norepinephrine also. So I guess, okay, mechanism binding to serotonin receptors. Okay, LSD binds to the serotonin 5-HT2A receptors, which are primarily located in the cortex, hippocampus, and amygdala. I wonder why since it's located in the amygdala, why all patients with LSD histories seem to be so unpredictable. I wonder because the receptors in the amygdala, activation of receptors. Upon binding, LSD activates the serotonin receptors, leading to release of serotonin and other neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine. The increased neurotransmitter activity disrupts the normal balance of brain chemistry, resulting in a psychedelic effect. Okay. See, very seldom I see visual hallucinations, but I typically see the visual hallucinations in deliriums, and I wonder if the LSD is producing a delirium here, and that's why we see the visual hallucinations. But however, hallucinations here, vivid hallucination. Now remember, vivid hallucinations really and auditory experiences could be deliriums. Altered consciousness, yeah. Emotion, cognitive function. Okay, all right. Let me see the structure of it. Okay. See, what is the treatments of LSD intoxication? Respiratory support, endotracheal intubation if needed, hypertension, tachycardia, hyperthermia. These seem to be different from like cocaine. Methamphetamines can have these hyperthermia, things like that also, but it's different. Okay, so this is the over the past few lectures, I had a chance to review all of the drugs of abuse and the impact that they have on this mesolimbic pathway. So when we see patients in the inpatient setting, we typically see them in withdrawals. And that's when we have to start treating at this point. Let me know if it's at this point, it's 18 minutes. I didn't want to go too far in this. And I think that's all I wanted to say for those two substances. And let me know if there's any questions. If anyone has any questions, let me know. Let me see here. Okay, nice to see you, Doc. Okay, good to see you. Okay, great. Okay, let me see here first. Okay, T-Jam. How does PCP affect the mesolimbic pathway differently from LSD? See here. Let me show you here. Let me see here. This is the mesoreceptors. Yep, I went through it. Okay, let me see the next question. Okay, next questions. Are hallucinations purely from the visual cortex, or is dopamine involved too? Yeah, I think all of these will have to come from that cortex. It's just dopamine, excessive amounts of dopamine can be associated with hallucinations, visual hallucinations, but I never really see them that much in the context of schizophrenia. I usually see visual hallucinations in the context of confusion or deliriums or drug intoxication like PCP, LSD, things like that. But very seldom do I see visual hallucinations associated with just schizophrenia. Next, see Max. Good to see you, Max. Max. Next. Okay, great. How does the mesolimbic pathway contribute to LSD's hallucination versus PCP's dissociation? Good question. Good question. Their mechanism of action. The mechanism of action. Nice to see you, Doc. Hey, Maria. Okay, great. Next, here. Let's see here. Is the long-term psychological impact more dangerous than immediate high? I think so, because the immediate high could lead to brain cell death. And with that brain cell death, you get the inflammation and that inflammatory response that makes the blood-brain barrier porous. When the localized injuries create the porous blood-brain barrier, then everything comes into this central nervous system space. And how does all this equipment work with all this filthy, dirty stuff all around? So it does have an impact on the psychological dysfunction long term, because you lose the organs start to malfunction. So the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and frontal lobe start to become impaired because of the damages. Okay. Any other question? If there's no other question, just 21 minutes. I think I can go ahead and sign out at 21 minutes if it's not any other questions. Okay, great. So no other questions. I'll see you guys later, and we'll pick up this discussion later. Okay, take care of yourself. Bye. This discussion is going to be on the mesolimbic pathway, specifically G proteins, and drug intoxication and withdrawals. So we went through the series we went through the mesocortical pathway, and now we're going through the mesolimbic pathway, and we went through the different receptors on these pathways. And one of the receptors are the G protein receptors. This is a family of very sophisticated molecular molecules, molecular machines, and they do a lot of the work. They do the work at the molecular level. These G proteins are amazing structures, just fascinating. And they basically, whatever objects a molecule binds to them, it translates the purpose of that molecule to the cell body and does something. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion about G proteins, intoxication, and drug withdrawals. And we're going to look at this in the context of the mesolimbic pathway, since the mesolimbic pathway is the pathway for reward and learning, reward, motivation, and learning. And so this is often the target for substances of abuse, particularly cocaine, methamphetamines, like we went through PCP, LSD, ecstasy, things like that. So hopefully we'll have a really good discussion real soon. And I will be opening a walk-in clinic in the first floor of Jackson Park Hospital on the Stony Island side. It's not open yet, but hopefully the next couple of weeks we'll have that open. And hopefully I can get it running 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So for my patients, and if you need any outpatient services, then hopefully we'll be able to have those services available for you also. The second issue, I'll be opening my online clinic. And so for my patients, if you need to get in touch with me, you can simply download my application, my platform, and just be able to get in direct contact with me without a middleman. So soon I'll be launching my online platform that'll allow me to manage all of my patients and their issues online. At that point, when after I launch my online clinic, then I'll be able to take care of my patients from home, and we'll be able to do all the evaluation from home and give you all the information up front, meaning your diagnosis, your medication, your treatment plan, and things like that. We'll give you all those things up front, and then you can decide what hospital you want to go to. So if it's not a life-threatening emergency, if you don't need to go to the emergency department, then after I open my online clinic, I should be able to evaluate you from home and help you select the hospital you want and try to help you get there to that. We'll help you get there to the hospital. So we're going to have a lot of changes, a lot of new changes and innovations that we're going to be introducing to the healthcare space, and I think it's going to make huge changes. So, for example, I feel the need as a physician to try to give my patients additional tools to help them maintain their autonomy while they're in hospitals. So I'm very concerned about the state of hospitals and the condition that I often see my patients. So we'll be introducing some of those tools into the marketplace and everything, and I hope you like it. So here, okay, for now, let me just go over, let's start now. We can go over G proteins, okay? So let me see here. Let's see here. Okay, so I want to use the search engine. Show me how G proteins work. Okay, G protein coupled receptors, also known as 7-transmembrane domain receptors, are a large protein family that acts as signal transducers. And so the last time I read this, it was like 6 transmembranes, so apparently 7. So these are huge proteins that actually go the entire length of the phospholipid bilayer. So it extends the entire length of the phospholipid bilayer. And these components typically work together as subunits. After there's some type of binding of the ligand at one end, it results in a 3D conformational change, and that results in other things. So these things are fascinating. But anyway, anything that binds to them on the outside of the cell, the signal gets transduced on the inside, translated on the inside, then there's something, a product that's usually created. They are involved in various biological processes, responding to a diverse stimuli like hormones, neurotransmitters, and light. So these G proteins can receive a lot of different type of inputs: hormones, neurotransmitter, even light. Here's how it works. Activation. G proteins possess a specific binding site, right? Called for a ligand. When the ligand, such as a hormone, binds to the site, it induces a conformational change in the receptor. This triggers the G protein to bind. This triggers G proteins to bind to the activated receptors. Okay. So next, G protein activation. The G protein, a heteromatrix, meaning there's multiple different types of subunits. The G protein is made of different types of subunits, I think 7, and each one of them are different. Composed of alpha, beta, gamma subunits, also associated with the G, is associated in the protein when it's in active state. Okay, when the G protein is activated, the G protein binds it. causes the alpha subunit to release GDP and bind GDP. Okay, something like that. Great. The exchange of GDP for GTP activates the G protein, causes it to dissociate into two parts. So it causes it to release the alpha and beta subunits. Okay. Signal transduction. Both the activated subunit and the beta gamma dimer can then interact with various intracellular signaling molecules, such as enzymes or ion channels, initiating downstream signaling cascades. Okay. These cascades usually lead to a specific cellular response, like a gene expression. Right? Terminating the signal. To terminate the signal, the alpha subunit hydrolyze GDP to GTP to GDP again, causing it to reassociate it with the beta gamma dimer, inactivating G protein. Makes sense. Okay, so that's sort of like the sort of like framework or how it works. Ligand binds conformational changes, then it produces stuff that produces stuff from the cell body, or produces stuff that it exports from the cell. And so remember, on the mesolimbic pathway, this mesolimbic pathway, it has NMDA receptors and glutamate receptors, and these glutamate receptors are G proteins, and so this is how they work. Just look at the next section here. Let me see if I can answer a question here. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to sort of let me know, and I'll sort of stop as I go along. Okay, so first question for TJM. Hey, TJM, thanks for the question, TJM. Why do some people feel euphoria while others feel paranoia from intoxication? The euphoria will be activation of that mesolimbic system, right? And paranoia, activation of that mesocortical symptom, because you get activation of the mesocortical pathway, you get positive symptoms. Some of the positive symptoms could be perceptual disturbances, paranoia, things like that. Or, these drugs also impact the ego. The ego can also cause you to sort of feel a sense of paranoia. These are two different networks. Thanks for the question. Next question from Muhammad. Thanks, Muhammad, for the question. Is intoxication purely a dopamine effect, or do G proteins play a separate role? Intoxication is associated with the mesolimbic pathway, which is a highly dopaminergic pathway. And these dopamine receptor, and that the pathway has G proteins, right? Glutamate is a G protein, right? So glutamate is on the pathway. If you get overexcitation of glutamate, you get hyperactivity of the pathway, and the glutamate receptor is a G protein. Okay. Okay. Let me use the next question, next section here. I wanted to, let's see, explain ion channel depolarization secondary to G protein activation and substance dependency. Explain ion channel depolarization secondary to G protein activation and substance abuse dependency. Okay. In substance abuse, the intoxication is not mediated through the G protein. It's mediated through the chloride channels that's in close proximity to it. And the intoxication is secondary to the degree of depolarization. All right. So here, my question was explain how the chloride channel next to the G protein, it affects intoxication and withdrawal. Okay, here's a question. Depolarization of ion channels, okay, secondary to G protein activation. Okay, so the G protein is activated, and then you get depolarization of the ion channel. It plays a significant role in substance dependency, by influencing neuronal excitability and synaptic plasticity. Right. And so this opening and closing of chloride channel affects the excitability of the neuron and also the learning part. That's the plasticity. Here, how does this process unfold? Okay, neurotransmitters binding to the G protein activation. Okay, addictive substances or neurotransmitters like dopamine bind to specific G protein coupled receptors on the neuron membrane. Okay. This binding triggers a conformational change in the G protein, causing it to activate the associated heterometric G protein. Okay. The activated G protein promotes the exchange of GDP to GTP and the alpha subunit, leading to the dissociation of alpha subunit, okay, from the dimer. Okay. We went through that on the previous discussion when the alpha and the beta subunit separates from the G protein, and that's the activated state. Okay, next, G protein mediated modulation of the ion channels. Okay, it does it by direct gating or by second messenger pathways. Okay. In some cases, the activated G protein subunits can bind directly to and gate ion channels, all influencing the opening and closing. Oh, wow. So the subunits, the activated subunits themselves can bind to the G protein channels. The degree of depolarization of the channel it gives you an indication of the degree of intoxication, right? And and over time, the channel becomes less sensitive to the G proteins, so you don't get as much depolarization. And therefore, you may have to use a substance for longer or something like that. Second, it also does it by direct gating by the G proteins themselves, directly interacting with the ion gate channels. Second, the second messenger system. Okay, more commonly, G proteins activate intracellular signaling pathways, include involving second messenger systems like cyclic AMP. Okay, and we'll go through this a little. We'll go through this. I'll go through this on the diagram. Okay. Impact of neuronal activity and synaptic plasticity. Okay. Excitatory postsynaptic potentials. This depolarization, if sufficient, can reach the threshold for generating an action potential, transmitting a signal down the neuron. This is sort of like the system, the level never goes back to baseline. So it takes, you only have to do the difference in order to spark an action potential. Synaptic plasticity. This G protein mediated depolarization along with other downstream signal cascades can lead to long lasting changes in synaptic strength, known as synaptic plasticity, which is like long-term potentiation. Okay. And then here, long-term potentiation addiction. In the context of substance dependency, this process is particularly relevant in reward pathways in the brain. Psychostimulus, for example, induce long-term potentiation at an excitatory synapse on dopamine neurons in the VTA. Okay, activating dopamine receptors. Okay, this strengthens the synapses in the reward system, and it contributes to reinforcing properties of drugs and the formation of drug-seeking behaviors. Okay, I hope that wasn't too complicated. Let's see here. Okay, I have another question here. Okay, let's see here from Muhammad. Let's see here. Is it possible to block or alter G protein signaling to reduce intoxication effect? Okay, so we're talking about the dopamine receptor, and I'm not sure if we want to block the dopamine receptor. I'm not sure of that question. I don't. Okay, is it possible to block or alter G protein signature? I don't. I don't think it is. To answer that question, I don't think so. Let's see. Okay, next. Okay, Hannah. Okay, thanks for the question, Hannah. Doc, are G protein effects reversible after long term drug use? Um, we're going to get to that a little bit later. That this chronic use results in basically down regulation of some of the receptors, and because you down regulate the receptors, then when you no longer take the drug, the system isn't able to sort of balance itself. And so we'll get to that a little bit later. So hopefully I'll be able to answer that question. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, here, let me get to this next section here. Okay, here's a diagram that I found here. This is the a basic cell, just a basic cell here. Phospholipid bilayer. Here's a G protein transcending the phospholipid bilayer. Then it has this alpha, gamma, beta supplex, things like this, right? Okay, now notice, let me see how they have here. They have this leading to this, and I think they have this leading to this, and did they have this leading to this? I don't know. Okay, but anyway, so here's the molecule attaching here and resulting in 3D conformational change. And the conformational, and the result of the ligand binding to the outside of the G protein results in changes on the inside. It's going to either secrete a substance here from the cell during this process, right? Or is going to send instructions to the cell body to create a product, or is going to open a channel. So you look at the complexity of these molecules, these molecular machines, the G proteins, and the range of molecules that they can attach to create conformational changes, to create instructions for the cell body and coordinate the response of what's happening to the cell body. It's amazing to see. And all of these diverse proteins either result in three things: secretion of a product out of the cell, instructions for the cell, the nucleus, to create a product, or open or closing channels. Here. Explain cocaine withdrawal at the molecular level, including the receptors. So we're talking about the mesocortical pathway, highly dopaminergic, so it's impacted in cocaine, methamphetamines, ecstasy use, things like that. Also, the mesolimbic pathway is a target for cocaine, and we see the cocaine toxicity as our patients with cocaine dependency issues typically have very severe memory problems, and we pick those up on our neuropsych testing. So let's see here. Okay. When someone becomes dependent on cocaine and stops using it, they experience cocaine withdrawals. A complex neurobiological process involving significant changes at the molecular level, at the molecular and cellular level, in various brain regions revolved in reward, motivation, and stress, right? Mesocortical, mesolimbic, and mesocortical. Initial mechanism of action of cocaine. Cocaine's euphoric and rewarding effects are primarily due to its actions on the brain reward pathway, right? Mesocortical, particularly in the nucleus accumbens. I think that's where that mesocortical begins, somewhere around there, right? Cocaine achieves this by blocking the reuptake of neurotransmitters like dopamine. On the presynaptic cell are reuptake pumps. The purpose of these reuptake pumps is to pull the substances that you're secreting, ejecting out of the cell back into the cell, because you're going to need to build up another supply to start the next round that's going to come out. And then inside the synaptic clefts are enzymes that degrade the molecules. And so you have huge reuptake pumps that always pull the dopamine back into the cell. And so cocaine blocks the uptake of block the activity of the reuptake pumps. And so as that presynaptic nerve is sending out the vesicles full of dopamine, there's nothing else coming back in it. And so it eventually runs out of dopamine. And therefore that synaptic cleft becomes depleted of dopamine. And therefore you're in dopamine, the whole network is hypoactive, and therefore you're having dopamine withdrawals. So here, cocaine, so it blocks reuptake of dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, right, by their respective transporters, the reuptake transporters. Okay. Leading to an accumulation of these neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. That's cocaine. The surge in dopamine levels in particular activates dopamine 1 and 2 on the postsynaptic neurons of the nuclear accumbens, which contributes to the feeling of pleasure and reward. Great, we got that mechanism action. So basically it blocks all the reuptake pumps and all the neurotransmitters build up in the space. Neuroadaptations in chronic cocaine use. Okay. With prolonged cocaine use, the brain adapts to the heightened dopamine levels by reducing its natural dopamine production and decreasing the number of dopamine receptors in the reward pathway. Doesn't need that much. These are the compensatory mechanisms to normalize the excessive dopamine signaling. Wow. Wow. So with chronic cocaine use, you get down regulation of the dopamine receptors. Yeah. This process of regulation is known as tolerance, where the individual requires higher doses of cocaine to receive the desired effect. That got me. So hit the reuptake pumps. That's easy. Turning the reuptake pumps is pretty easy. Just turn them off. And then chronic use, start to download receptors. Chronic cocaine use can also induce changes in glutamate transmission. Okay, yeah, I knew glutamate was going to be here some story because we see excessive agitation combative from aggressiveness, particularly during cocaine intoxication, which involves alterations in AMPA and NMDA receptors in the brain, like the nuclear accumbens and prefrontal cortex. And so basically, then the chronic cocaine use alters glutaminergic transmission. And I bet you it alters it for the worse. I think it makes it more active. And I think that's why you can get the agitation, combativeness, and all that stuff. In the nuclear accumbens, withdrawal from repeated cocaine exposure has been shown to result in increased levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factors, which lead to selective downregulation of certain glutamate receptors, impairing the induction of some type of long-term depression. Oh, wow. Okay. There's evidence suggesting that possible downregulation. There is evidence suggesting that possible downregulation of D2 receptors functional response via interactions between Okay. Molecular mechanisms during cocaine withdrawal. When cocaine is stopped, the brain's adapted state is disrupted, leading to a sudden and significant dopamine deficit, which contributes to the withdrawal symptoms, including depression, anxiety, and anhedonia. Remember, you blocked all the reuptake of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and then the cocaine caused the release of those in the synaptic cleft. And I guess all of it was metabolized or left the region through volume transmission, diffusion. Okay, here, so when it stopped, okay, it's disrupted. This dopamine deficit and the reduced sensitivity of the reward system make it difficult for individuals to experience pleasure from its natural rewards, reinforcing the cycle of addiction, making relapse. So if you run out of all of those neurotransmitter in the presynaptic cell, at some point you're going to have a absence of them in the synaptic space. If it's not there, then the whole transmission on the mesocortical pathway is hypoactive. And if the pathway is hypoactive, then you get the cluster of symptoms associated with mesolimbic pathway hypoactivity. And that's what we see with drug and cocaine withdrawal when we see the patients in the morning. And this I don't want to get into any else that are here. Let me just do here. I just looked up methamphetamines. Real quick. Okay, let me just see if there's anything different. Methamphetamine withdrawal symptoms are profoundly influenced by G protein changes, okay, signaling pathways in the brain, particularly those involving neurotransmitter. Okay, methamphetamines significantly elevated extracellular dopamine level by increasing release and inhibit uptake. Okay, so methamphetamines does the same pathway. Chronic use leads to damage of the dopamine pathway, damage of the dopamine system, potentially affecting both dopamine level and the number of dopamine transporter and receptors. Yeah, so this is the same thing. The chronic changes. They didn't say what impact the chronic cocaine changes has on the reuptake pumps. They just mentioned how much the chronic cocaine use have on the impact of the postsynaptic receptors, and it so causes down regulation of those receptors. But I wonder what chronic change is happening to those reuptake pumps. This damage disrupts the delicate balance between dopamine transition, leads to a downward balance of state of imbalance upon sensation. Okay. G protein coupled receptor withdrawal. Dopamine receptors, which belong to G protein families, are crucial. Okay, D1 receptors activate G proteins and stimulate, increases cycle AMP, which inhibits and D2 decreases cycle AMP. Okay, great. And let me just look. Okay, that's it. Okay, I think that's it for now. So I think I'm going to end the series on the mesolimbic pathway, because I think mesolimbic and the mesocortical pathway, because I think in a series I went through each one of the pathways and went through receptors on each one of them. We're going through these drugs of abuse, the mechanism for each one of them. And I think each video is around at least 20 minutes, probably at the max. I think this is the longest one. So I think I'm going to be finished with this series of this series on the mesolimbic and mesocortical pathway. I don't think I need to review that anymore. Does anyone have any other questions before we end for the day? Just let me know. Okay. So if there are no questions, let me see. Okay, so at the end of this, I want to just reiterate some of the things we have coming up. For all my patients, I'm going to be launching my online clinic, and I would want you to register or sign up on my online clinic so we can stay in direct contact. I want to get to the point where I can evaluate you at home via video conferencing or telepsychiatry and do your entire workup there. And after I got your entire workup there, then I can sort of help you get to the hospital that you want to get to. So I think I'm going to start offering that service for all of my patients to try to get them to the hospital they need. Also, I'll be opening a walk-in clinic at Jackson Park Hospital. That's going to become up maybe in the next couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. And so if you're interested in working with me or me taking care of you or someone in your family, then you can just contact me and let me know. Okay. Otherwise, I'll call it a day. Take care. It's a pleasure with everyone. I hope this was helpful for you, everybody. Take care, guys.